Hi all, Sysguy2 here with a video that has been a long time coming. A while back I made a video on the KSC Vz61, one of my favorite replicas, specifically looking at how to disassemble the lower receiver. Now with that video I didn't go quite as in depth as I should have, so if there's anyone who needs assistance with disassembling the valve knocker assembly, which I didn't really touch on in that, please don't hesitate to reach out in the comments or on the Heavy Recoil Club Discord. So why might you want to take a look and disassemble your upper receiver? There are a few reasons. You might have an aftermarket bolt, something like the Spear Arms steel bolt carrier for the KSC or KWA Vz61. You might have picked up a HEF recoil power kit. If you have picked up one of these, by all means, great, install it. I find these don't really do all that much for you. The amount of mass that's changed there really doesn't change much, so it's not really a necessary upgrade. If you've gotta catch them all for the upgrades though, by all means, pick it up. So maybe you're looking at one of those, or maybe you're looking to reduce the rate of fire, which we'll take a look at here. Or maybe you're looking to change something up with the hop-up or the barrel. The hop-up, we're fairly limited on options, but these are one of the best upgrades that you can make for these. These are the Maple Leaf Evo hop-up Easy Packs. These are just great, great little pieces here. We've got the 75 degree on the right and an 80 degree on the left. 80 degree has a couple other spare buckings in there, but these can dramatically increase the performance of your replica. But maybe you also just want to disassemble your gun and know how everything works. So let's go ahead and begin. To start with, we'll go ahead and remove the magazine as always and verify that the replica is unloaded and without gas. At this point, we can unfold the stock, and we will begin by pushing out this front pin. This front pin pushes from the right through to the left, and we'll hear that there are 2 points for audible clicks with this pin. And we'll go to the first. So that first audible click allows your receiver to slide slightly forward. We can see that move slightly forward and rotate up. This is great if you're doing something quick on the field, like maybe adjusting your hop-up if you lost your hop-up key, or servicing the bolt or something along that line. But if you want to fully remove the upper receiver, you'll need to pull that out just a little further to the second click, and the upper receiver can slide off. At this point, we'll set aside our lower receiver, and we can push that pin back in. And now we can go ahead and remove our bolt. So removal of the bolt, we slide all the way to the rear and then push slightly forward again, and we can remove those little charging lugs. We can see if we go all the way to the rear, our charging lugs do not line up, and so you are not able to get them out of that little hole, so you need to have it just slightly forward. Now that we have both of those out, we can slide the bolt to the rear, and we'll begin taking a look at our bolt assembly here. So I'll set aside our upper for now. Our bolt carrier and recoil guide rod assembly is all one piece that is pretty easily swapped out or serviced. We've got a few key components in here. We have our recoil springs and guide rod assembly. These are captive, unlike a lot of KWA replicas, which is very, very, very nice. You don't really run much of a risk of these eating themselves. One upgrade, so to speak, that many folks will do is take out one of these springs. Thank you to the folks at the Heavy Recoil Club for pointing that out. That can be a great way to lower your rate of fire to be a little bit more in line with that of the real replica, or not the real replica, the real firearm. And it can also kind of save those 20-round magazines to last just a little bit longer. To do so, we can turn this over and we can see that this rear plastic piece keeps these guide rods in place and keeps those springs held captive. So if we want to remove one, we'll slide that spring back just a little bit and then pop that off. And we could hear that just kind of audibly pop off. And make sure that you've got a hand there so you can gently remove that spring. If we want to do the same on the other side, we'll go ahead and pop that other side off too. If you're looking to just reduce your rate of fire though, this is all you need to do. Click that back in place, reassemble, and you're good to go. I am going to fully disassemble this though, so I'm going to pop that other side off and remove that recoil spring. You might be looking at these two springs sitting here and say, hey, those are slightly different wires, slightly different coil on those, slightly different lengths. One of these, this lighter spring, is from a KSC Japan replica. This gun that we're working on today was originally first batch released in Japan with that short 10-round magazine. And to comply with Japanese gases, used a lighter weight recoil spring. For KSC Taiwan or like Europe release or KWA in North America, you're going to have these slightly sturdier springs. I've got kind of a pairing of those two in my replica to tone down the rate of fire a bit, but not too far. So now that we've done that, both of our recoil guide rods just slide out the front. These are interchangeable, so no need to keep them apart from each other. Now we come to the bolt and our nozzle assembly, and we can see if we slide that open, we've got a few parts in there, including that HEF recoil power kit, which we'll take a look at the difference between that and the stock. So if you're just taking a look at this, you might say, hey, how do I go about getting this disassembled? We need two things here. We've got our pin here that will need to be driven out, and we have a hex screw right here, or an Allen screw. I would recommend starting with this pin so you can remove this whole assembly, and then go ahead and remove that screw. While we have things in place, I'm going to just loosen that screw though. So this is a 2.5 metric, and we're already a little loose there, so we should be good to go. Always easier to remove or kind of loosen screws when you have the most leverage on a part. So this is a roll pin here. I would recommend using a roll pin punch. Folks are going to say, hey, sis guy, you're not using a roll pin punch in this video. What the heck's up? My roll pin punches are somewhere. We just recently moved, and I do not know where those are. So, if you're working on this, ideally know where those are at. So I'm going to start with a slightly larger punch to just get that started and get it moving from the other side, and then move to our more correct sized punch. Our hammer's a little loose here. Ideally, this is a time where you would put this on a block and not be doing this over a surface like this. Okay, I have now driven that roll pin most all the way out, as somewhat expected, attempting to pound on this while holding it in my hand above the desk didn't work too well. So I took it out, set this on the bench vise, and hammered down. If you don't have a bench vise, you'll just need some sort of sturdy block, shoot even a book, or like a very thick book that you don't mind denting, or something along that line. Ideally put down a towel or something on the underside so you don't scuff up your bolt. But I've driven that pin out, and we can see it is almost all the way there, and we are out. This roll pin can be driven out from either side. I started from the right and punched through, but either way is great. At this point, you are left with your bolt assembly with that removed, and we can go ahead and remove this 2.5 Allen hex head that's in the rear. We can see as we start removing that, our nozzle and that whole assembly starts kind of migrating out just a bit. But if we remove that, that is exclusively holding that recoil power kit and our like our piston head in place. Aside from that, it's not doing all that much for us. So this we now drive out the back of the gun. What I like to do for this is take a slightly larger punch. You want to be very careful with this because you do not want to damage your nozzle, and tuck it just on this, just to the side of the nozzle, and just give it a light tap. You're not looking to heavily bash this by any means. You're just trying to lightly drive that out. So we've bonked that out. And at this point, this is why I removed this hex head before taking it out, as then you have basically everything disassembled now, and you're not having to deal with holding these little springs in place while kind of fighting with your Allen key there. So, if you're installing your HEF recoil power kit, or I believe I have a different piston head or valve cup on this, at this point we can go ahead and delve in on those. So these springs here are very delicate. These are one of the most commonly damaged pieces on the Vz61. You can see that this one on the side over here is starting to go, and it's kind of holding on by a thread. And so we might go ahead and replace that while we're here today. I like to use a very small flathead screwdriver to kind of pop these up and off from this backside as opposed to on the front. One thing I also like to do on these is to just, when reassembling, put a small dab of glue on there to make sure, right on that front, to make sure that these springs are not going to pop off and eat themselves at any point. So we can see to remove from the rear, I just put that flathead there and then lightly pushed it up. We're not putting really much of any pressure on that spring, and we can slide that off. Now we get to our HEF recoil power kit. So if you are disassembling this and you have a stock replica, what you are going to see is something that looks like this. So we've got our cup here. This creates the seal, which allows for the replica to actually like blow back as you kind of gather force. but this is attached here by default. And if you are using the heft piece, this just slides out. These can be, as this is exemplifying, a little stiff. So we're just gonna pop that right back out. Come on, friend. There we are. So this is the hef. The hef is basically the same as the stock. You reuse this stock cup here. I have put on an MEC piston head. These are fine. I don't think it changed all that much with the Vz61. Looks cool. Nice match for the hef recoil power kit, but really not much. This is a light enough piece that the weight difference between these two is really not going to give you all that much in the way of recoil increase. I just weighed the two of these, and our stock assembly here is 8 grams. This hef assembly with the MEC piston head is 24 grams. So although it is a 3 times increase, if it's a small enough amount of weight though that it's really not going to impact much. But at this point we can go ahead and reassemble these. So that'll slide on, and we can drop that Allen head screw in there. I would recommend putting just a small dab of blue Loctite on that screw before fully reassembling. This is also an opportunity to take a look at our spear arms steel bolt. Now, the spear arms bolt is a drop-in replacement for the KSC or KWA bolts. It's just made of steel as opposed to aluminum. Weight differences are quite significant between these two. Our stock bolt carrier is 40 grams versus 178 with our spear arms. So definitely a significant increase there. Now, what I would like to do is just, if you're installing a spear arms, test fit, make sure everything fits together. We're looking good there before assembling. The last thing you want to do is fully assemble the replica and realize that something isn't quite fitting. We're looking nice and snug. We should be good. We can go ahead and put the nozzle back in. We'll slide it in place, and we can just stretch our spring and attach back on that rear. This process can be a little finicky. You could do this with pliers. It's probably a wiser move. Trying to be extra delicate with this though. There we go. We've got it just started there. And now we're going to make sure it's fully seated by just kind of touching it with our screwdriver. Okay, so at this point we have reassembled our nozzle unit, and we can go ahead and add it back inside of our bolt carrier. Now to begin, as this is a brand new bolt carrier, just so everything kind of plays nicely, I'm going to put kind of a thin layer of grease on everything just to make sure everything beds together okay and that we are sitting all right. I test fit this before, and we had just the faintest bit of binding from stuff just being very new and very stiff, and so this should help make sure that everything is just sitting nicely. Now, it might not have been a bad idea for us to go ahead and lube that O-ring in there as well, but I'm going to go ahead and skip that for the time being. So now we can go ahead and assemble this. So let's go ahead and we can see how that just slots into place, and we'll slide that in real nice and smooth. That's perfect. And then we'll do the same thing and put our roll pin in, and we are seated nicely for the roll pin as well. We can go ahead and tap that in place. This is again another point where having those roll pin punches on hand is very nice. We had just a little bit of metal flashing come out of that. This is a new bolt, and there seem to be a couple little rough edges. So one thing you want to make sure to do when reassembling these bolts is make sure that that pin is flush or slightly inset. If you leave that pin sitting out, it is going to scrape on the inside of your upper receiver, and we very much do not want that. Now everything else, we continue reassembling in reverse. So we can add these. Now with our bolt being so much drastically heavier, I am presuming that my previous recoil spring setup with the KSC Japan recoil spring paired with a KSC Taiwan recoil spring is not quite going to cut it. And so I'm going to try this, and we're just going to reassemble, but this is probably one where we're going to want to ultimately have that heavier recoil spring. There's a little arrow on this. If you can see there, you want to make sure that that arrow is pointed forward. I don't know if that's 100% necessary, because this little clip back here looks the same both ways. So I think you could flip it around, but the arrow points forward, so I would go ahead and put it back the way that you found it. So now our bolt is reassembled. If we were to go ahead and reassemble our upper from here, I would go ahead and put a little bit of lube on the super lube on the recoil springs, and I would do it on the sides and the top of the bolt as well, as this is a pretty snug fit in KSC or KWA Vz61s. But we're not done. We still have more to do. Let's go ahead and finish our disassembly. So one thing that I'm going to touch on next is our rear sight assembly. Rear sight assemblies on these are one of the things that folks most frequently have issues with coming apart, in addition to the stock, during games. That's not great. But if you ever have one that disappears on you, it's good to know how this comes apart. So, pin drives out from the left side of the gun. We can see it is knurled on the right side. And then within here, we will have, this gets a little fiddly, we will have, I'm pressing on, we pressed here for that main hole. I'm pressing here to kind of depress our detent, and we can make sure to put a finger on the side of that when you're removing the rear sight, because otherwise this little detent here, which is under spring pressure, will fly out. We've got a little tiny detent and a small spring there. So these are just held captive by our pin there, and if you have that pin start to come out during a game, then you can pretty easily lose your rear sight. So my approach to addressing that, we're going to go ahead and reassemble, and again put a finger on the side and just slide that in, and you want to line it up with one of the detents. That's the easiest way to make sure that you don't lose that or don't have that disappear. And my go-to is to put just a little bit of blue Loctite on this as well. That will kind of help keep it captive. Again, we're not looking to like soak things down or do anything like that, but we just don't want this to come out when we don't want it to. So I actually put a fair bit there, so we're going to end up having to clean this up after we put that in. And we can kind of clean that up here. And we can see it just slides in place, and these are pretty light presses. And so this is something you don't need to hammer at home. You can just use like the tip of a screwdriver or something like that. To make sure it's nice and firmly seated, am going to take a slightly larger punch, set it here, and just do a very light tap. We'll do just a little bit more. And we are fully seated there. We can see that we are snug on the other side, and our sight can flip up and down. So we are set there, and that should help make sure that things are captive. So let's go ahead and keep disassembling here. For this front pin, we slid this in before. This you can fully remove. It just pops out. You can see those two detents. Those are the points that we were fiddling with before to help kind of separate it from the receiver, lower receiver partially and then fully. So a couple other things for removal of this. There is the front sight, and then there are going to be two pins here and what looks like a pin here. One of the biggest issues or challenges that I see folks have with disassembling these upper receivers is the whale on this pin. And this pin on a real Vz61 upper receiver, which I actually have one here, that is in use on a real Vz61 upper receiver to hold that barrel in place. It is just decorative on the airsoft one. So for this, do not go whacking away on that. It's not going to do anything for you. It is just going to mar your gun at the least and potentially damage it at the worst. So what we're going to do, we're going to drive out these pins here, and we are going to remove the rear sight. So for removing the rear sight, you will either want to use the rear sight tool that was supplied with your Vz61, or you can use a pair of pliers. If you are going to use a pair of pliers to remove that, you run a decent risk of marring the finish on this. So I would like to avoid that, and I also don't have my Vz61 sight tool, so I'm going to be using an AK sight tool today. They will both work together. So we can see that this just slots on here. That's the same structure as is used for the one out of the box, the factory one, and we can just rotate to the left. And there we go. Slowly rotate that off, and once we get that started, we can go ahead and do it by hand. For this replica, we want to make sure when we reinstall this that it is fully seated in place, as that's another piece that can come off without too much effort. Now we can see that we've got a flat head underneath, and so we will go ahead and remove that. And we'll just go ahead and remove that as well. There we go. We can see that my flat head here is not the perfect size, and so we ran a little bit of risk of rounding there. I slipped off just a tidge and left a little bit of a mar on the finish there, which is not ideal, so definitely try to avoid that. We have to remove the front sight in order to remove the barrel block here, as that is one of the things that helps keep this in place. So do make sure to take that off. You cannot just remove these pins and say, hey, everything will be fine. It will not. So next we are going to go ahead and remove these pins. And this is one, these can really easily get marred. And they are rounded on the outside, as on the real Vz61, these are rivets, not pins. You don't have to be too firm with them. You can see that popped out very easily. These are held in place by an O-ring. So really not a ton holding those in place. I am not aligning very well, and I am bonking my receiver. So I'm just going to do it like this and get that started, and then we can go ahead and press those out. You can see I am doing these by hand. They, as I said before, are held in place with O-rings, so you don't need that much force. You can see the little detents on those four being held captive by those O-rings. So this is what we want to avoid. We can see here, I bonked the receiver a couple times there, so we've got a couple very minor dents. Not great, but perfectly fine. At this point, the barrel and barrel block just slides out from the front of the replica. And at this point, we are all set with the upper receiver itself. So we can set that aside. And now we come to the barrel and barrel block. Now the barrel block is this piece here. We can see those two O-rings, so the pins are being held in place like that. And we can also see that detent that this retainer pin kind of rides against. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that detent. That's one that you can, if you start pounding away on this, pretty easily lose. We want to avoid anything like that. This is a spring that's under detent that's under spring pressure, so you do want to make sure to not just let that fly across the room. The O-rings generally stay seated, but I'll go ahead and pop those out just for the sake of this video. Now, to remove the barrel from the barrel block, we have another roll pin. This can be driven out from either side, but we will go ahead and drive from the right side because it's slightly inset, it appears. Got it started. Again, this is another one where please use roll pin punches. Don't follow my bad example here. And also, again, use a vise, or not necessarily a vise, but like a solid block. Don't just hold this in your hand. This is a terrible way to do this. All right, so at this point we can go ahead and slide the barrel out from the front. This is great if you decide to kind of change out your barrel, change out your outer barrel. If you've got a terrible orange tip on there and you want rid of that, perfect, this will fix you up. So at this point we can go ahead and this piece rotates down. This is your feed ramp. So do make sure to not kind of scuff this up or mess that up too much. And the only other piece that is holding our inner barrel in place is going to be this clip here. Now, I do have an aftermarket full barrel setup in here. Maple Leaf at one point made a full barrel assembly. If you're like, oh man, this guy, if only where could I get one of those? You're not missing out. They're not really doing all that much. They're not really anything to write home about. One of these Maple Leaf Evos with the stock setup is going to be plenty ample for one of these replicas. So at this point, this clip, you could see I just kind of pressured it out a little bit and then slid it up and over. And now we can go ahead and remove our barrel. Generally just with kind of a firm flick of the wrist, that'll come on out. And we can see our barrel is out and ready to go now. Now, to actually disassemble the hop-up unit on this, this sleeve ends up sliding forward. And then we can see we've got our bucking underneath. For the KWAs from stock, this actually replicates the stock setup. We have, I'm going to set this here and open up this Maple Leaf packaging. We have a few pieces, not this one. We have a few pieces to the stock KWA as well as to the Maple Leaf. So in your stock KWA, you're going to have a little arm. And this little arm sits just like this one, resting right there. And that is what provides that hop pressure. Sometimes this arm from the factory can be a little bit over or under bent, so kind of adjusting that can change the pressure that you're putting on that bucking in case you are, let's say, applying hop and not actually getting any hop, or kind of vice versa. All right. So my camera died and we missed a couple steps here, but we'd fully disassembled the replica and now we're in the process of putting this all back together. So how did we go about doing that? First, we slide the barrel assembly back in and we make sure that the two notches on the barrel are aligned with that little circlip that the plastic clip that goes over the top. We clip that plastic piece back in. We align our feed ramp back in place. I like to put it on from the front and then up and back to make sure that you are not like stuffing up and cutting your bucking or doing anything like that. We then go ahead and put that roll pin back in place. We can see I've marred the roll pin just a little bit, as again, this is a good time to use roll pin punches that are dedicated to doing exactly roll pins, as opposed to kind of halfway doing it like I am right now. We put our O-rings back as well as the spring detent, and we are ready to move forward. So we can go ahead and slip this back into our replica. Easiest to start all the way from the rear of the gun, slide it to the front, and we know that our O-rings are on the left side, so we can go ahead and push these pins in, and we can see we push them through and make sure that we've got that little notch aligning with those O-rings. So if these are a little stiff, that's okay. You can always kind of press them a little, but they shouldn't need much effort. Both are in place. We can see that we're shallow just a little. We can bump those back out and we are good to go on both of those. We can put our detent back in, or not our detent, our retaining pin, and then we can go ahead and reassemble the front sight. So we will go ahead and put that assembly on, and then again, with this replica, just go ahead and Loctite stuff. Or put a little bit of blue thread locker on. You don't need much, just a little. And help make sure that you don't have parts fall off mid-game at some point. So we'll use our screwdriver, tighten this front one back down. Do make sure to not cross-thread this. It's pretty easy to do if you're not paying attention. And we'll tighten that down. It doesn't need to be bonkers tight, just relatively tight. And then the front sight is, this piece is the one that I've had loosen most frequently. So we will also put a little bit of Loctite on it, or thread locker on it, and drop it down. And again, use our AK sight tool to tighten that down. As I said before, if you don't have an AK sight tool, there is a sight tool included with the Vz61 if you purchased one new. I believe, at least they used to, and if not, this is something, if you can 3D print an AK sight tool, or basically any sort of notched piece like that, should fix you up well. Even a cut in a dowel rod should work, just not like needle nose pliers or something. So we are pretty much back together now. I am going to go ahead and set aside my blue Loctite, and we are going to put a thin layer of grease on our bolt, as we touched on earlier. And this is ending up being a little bit more than thin, so but as we bed in, especially with this being a new bolt, it's good to have a little bit of protection to it. One thing to note with these spear arm steel bolts, they do seem to, the finish on them is not the best, and so they do seem to wear a little bit. So be aware of that. I'm going to basically just light coating on stuff, wipe it down just a little. And now we can go ahead and reassemble this. So we can set that down and slide this in, push all the way to the front and slide back. We can see everything is sitting smoothly and moving back and forth with that new bolt. Put our charging handle knobs back in place. Slide forward. We'll pop that pin back out and grab our lower receiver again, and we can fully reassemble. And we are all set with our steel bolt. Definitely a weight improvement with that piece, and we are good to go. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, please feel free to add them in the comments or hit me up on Heavy Recoil Club. Also, if you find yourself selling your Vz61 or anything else and you want an awesome airsoft marketplace, Kit Up is great. They're not going to hit you with the predatory fees that Hop Up does. It's run by an awesome guy and is a wonderful platform for sales in the US and worldwide. So join us here, check out Kit Up, and thanks for watching.